Good day to everyone. I am Janine Carmona and I will be giving you a brief introduction regarding the report of Group 2, which is Deontological Ethics by Immanuel Kant and John Rawls. In our report, we will be discussing to you the basic and general definition of our topic, and we will be discussing about Immanuel Kant and John Rawls' theories and version of it. But before we start, let me first introduce the members of Group 2. We have Carmona Janine, which is me, Manzo Sildensin Joseph, Makinta Kenneth Andre, Matulin Lauren Jill, Potane Anna Marie, Taasin Sherlyn, and Tanyara Riza Jane. Let's continue to deontological ethics. Its name comes from the Greek word deon, meaning duty, and logos for science or study. Deontology is a duty-based or rule-based ethics. It is a theory that suggests actions are good or bad according to a clear set of rules, and actions that obey these rules are ethical, while actions that do not are not. Another thing to keep in mind is that in deontology, it does not let us carry the weight or the cost and even the benefits of a situation. And by this, meaning we avoid subjectivity and uncertainty because we are just following. An example of this is imagine you are a soldier and you are going to war. We all know that in a war there is chaos and you have to kill or be killed. And we also know that killing and violence is never good. But as a soldier, it is one of your duties to protect the nation. And by that, you must do everything you can to fulfill that because that is your job.
Good day, everyone. I am Risa Jane Titanyara, and I will be discussing the introduction to Immanuel Kant. So, Immanuel Kant was born on April 22, 1724, in Königsberg, or what is now called the Kaliningrad, near the southeast shore of the Baltic Sea. So, he died on February 12, 1804, at the age of 79. He is born into a artisan family. Artisan means is someone that works with their hands to create unique, functional, and or decorative items using traditional techniques. Artisan are masters of their crafts and create products such as clothes, toys, tools, or furnishings. So his father was a master harness maker. His mother was a daughter of a harness maker. His parents were pietists. So pieties means that or believes that Christianity should be characterized by more than just thinking the right things about God, and it should be characterized by living in ways that demonstrates one's commitment to God. So he also entered because his parents were a pietist, so he also entered a pietist school, which is the Collegium Predericanum, or at the age of 8 to 15 years old. He also entered the University of Königsberg, or what is now called the Albertina. After college, Kant spent 6 years as a private tutor. So Immanuel Kant is the center figure of modern philosophy because he synthesized early modern rationalism and empiricism, set the terms for much of 19th and 20th century philosophy, and continues to exercise a significant influence today. So his significant influences is epistemology, ethics, political philosophy, aesthetics, and other fields. So he is famous with his three critics, or this is one of his significant works, which is Critic of Pure Reason, Critic of Practical Reason, and Critic of the Power of Judgment. He also has his first short work of ethics, which is Ground of the Metaphysics of Moral. So some of the main questions that Kant's ethics focuses on are questions of right and wrong. So the main questions of Kant's ethics is what makes actions right or wrong? Which actions are we required by mortality to perform? Do consequences matters? It is ever permissible to do something morally wrong in order to achieve good consequences? is it important to do actions with good intentions? So some of Kant's answers to some of these questions are complex, but as we will see, he doesn't think the consequences matter, and thus good consequences cannot justify wrong actions. So he also thinks that intentions are important to the ethical evaluation of actions.
Deontological ethics by Immanuel Kant. The distinctive features of Kant's ethics are that it focuses on duties defined by right and wrong. So meaning Kant's ethics focuses more on duties defined by right and wrong. Right and wrong are the primary deontological categories along with obligatory, optional, supererogatory, and others. These are distinct from good and bad. So good and bad are value categories, in that they directly prescribe actions, which is the right actions and the wrong actions. Right actions are ones we ought to do or are morally required to do. So right actions are actions that we need to do or are morally required to do. And wrong actions we ought not to do or are morally forbidden from doing. So wrong actions, from the word wrong, so you should not do these actions. Kant believes all our duties can be derived from categorical imperative. So later, we will discuss about categorical imperative. Kant believes that morality must be rational. So meaning, morality must be logical or reasonable. He models his morality on science, which seeks to discover universal laws that govern the natural world. So he represents his morality on science, which seeks to discover universal laws that govern the natural law. So he represents his morality on science. In Kant's view, right action is ultimately a rational action. Meaning rational, it is logical. So right action is ultimately a logical action. As an ethics of duty, Kant also believes that ethics consists of commands about what we ought to do. So Kant believes that ethics have a lot of commands on what we need to do. So there are two types of imperatives: hypothetical imperatives and categorical imperatives. So we will discuss first about the hypothetical imperative. A hypothetical imperative is a contingent command. So meaning contingent, it is dependent command. It's conditional on a person's wants, needs, or desires. So meaning it depends on what people or a person's wants, needs, or desires. So it depends on the person. So it normally comes in the following form. If you want or need A, then you should or ought to do B. For example, if you want to do well on a test, then you should study a lot. The command that you study is contingent, so meaning depend on your desire to do well on the test. So other examples are, if you are thirsty, drink water. Or if you want to be in better shape, you should exercise. So, such commands are more like advice on how to accomplish our goals than moral rules. So, meaning, in the hypothetical imperatives, the commands are more like advice on how to accomplish or achieve our goals or the desire that we have. So it helps the person to achieve the goal. If you don't have a particular want, desire, or goal, then hypothetical imperative does not apply. So if the person doesn't have a particular want, desire, or goal, then the hypothetical imperatives doesn't apply. So in the second imperative, which is the categorical imperative, a categorical imperative, instead of taking an if or then form, is an absolute command, such as do A or you ought to do A. So meaning the categorical imperative is an absolute command. It doesn't matter what your wants or goals are. So the categorical imperative does not matter or depend on your wants or goals. You should follow a categorical imperative no matter what. So no reason, no matter what, you should follow the categorical imperative. A genuinely moral imperative would not be contingent on one's desires or needs. And this is what is meant by categorical imperative. So meaning, the categorical imperative is not dependable. It is not dependent on what people desires. If the hypothetical imperative is dependent on what people desires, the categorical imperative is not dependent. So meaning it is independent. So no matter, no reason, you should do the categorical imperative. It is an absolute command. No reasons, no matter what, you should follow the categorical imperative. So for example, you should not kill. You ought to help those in need, or don't steal. You should follow that. That is an example of the categorical imperative. So remember that the hypothetical is dependable. It is dependent on what people desires or what person's goal. The categorical imperative are more likely an absolute command that you should follow the categorical imperative. So meaning it does not depend on what person desires or person's goal.
Now I will be discussing about the first formulation of the categorical imperative. So the underlying idea behind the first formulation of the categorical imperative is that moral rules are supposed to be universal laws or natural laws, meaning they are applicable to any time and anywhere in the past, present, or the future. So from this idea, Kant derives his first formulation of the categorical imperative: act only in accordance with that maxim, through which you can at the same time will that it becomes a universal law. So an example of this is, you should act in a way that you would want everyone else in the world to act too. And by that, you should also avoid doing things that you wouldn't want anyone else to do also. Yes, yes, right. So the first formulation is a test of whether any particular maxim should be followed or not. So before any maxim is made, we make sure to test it out first by universalizing it and making sure if it is worthy enough to be followed by everyone. And if we cannot universalize it, meaning we can that just means that it is impossible for everyone to follow it and live by it. And the logic behind this is that everyone should be equal and should follow the same rules because no one is special, and so that just means that there is no exception. We should note that Kant's universalization test is not asking whether universalizing maxim would lead to undesirable consequences. Problems with the first formulation. One criticism that Kant faced among his contemporaries was for his stance on lying, because he supported lying. Well, he supported the part where you lie because you have to, or in order for you to get the benefits or the important things, or when it's for the sake of others, that's when you lie. It is okay. And many was not happy about that and were confused as to why you need to lie. But Kant argued and stated that, or pointed out that lying is okay because the consequences is not about the action that you did, if it is right or wrong, because the consequences that will happen after you lie are unpredictable. And another problem for the first formulation is that it's possible to imagine maxims that can't be universalized but that don't seem to be moral. An example of this is a girl who likes to collect jewelries but has the mindset of she wants to buy but wouldn't sell. So if everyone were to have this kind of mindset, then there will be no one else to buy any jewelries from, because everyone will be collecting one.
So I will be discussing the second formulation of the categorical imperative of Immanuel Kant. So the idea underlining the second formulation is that all humans are intrinsically valuable. So Kant writes, what has a price can be replaced by something else as its equivalent. What, on the other hand, is raised above all price and therefore admits of no equivalent has a dignity. So what has a price is a thing. So, but a person has dignity and is thus beyond price and irreplaceable. It follows that a person with dignity deserves respect and shouldn't be treated as a thing. He also writes that so act that you can use humanity whether in your own person or in the person of any other, always at the same time as an end, never merely as a means. So Kant expresses this idea in the second formulation of his categorical imperative, that is, we shouldn't treat people merely as means to ends. We shouldn't treat them as ends. We should treat them as ends, including ourselves. To treat someone merely as a means to is to not give the person the proper respect. To fail to treat the person with dignity, to treat the person as a thing. If you harm someone, take advantage of someone, or steal from someone, then you treat that person as a thing, so as a means to your ends. Conversely, if you treat someone as having unlimited value, if you treat the person with dignity and respect, then you treat that person as an end. Since the second formulation, since the first formulation and the second formulation of the categorical imperative are supposed to be saying the same thing, they should come to exactly the same conclusions about what's right and wrong. Thus, since we discovered earlier that it's wrong to make a false promise, then the second formulation should also tell us that false promises are wrong. So to further understand, here are some examples. So first, you made the false promise because you needed to borrow money to pay your debts. So thus, your end was to pay your debts. So your end was to pay your debts. And by lying to your friend, you are forcing him to make your end. You are forcing him to make your end his end. So your end was to pay off debts, but by lying and lying, you are forcing him to make your end his end. So if you told your friend that you needed money and might not be able to pay it back, your friend would be able to decide whether he might decide to make your end his end. So he will be the one to pay off your debts for you. So but by depriving him of that choice, you are treating him as an object. For similar reason, we can also conclude that anytime we deceive someone, we are treating the person as a mere ends to our ends. So second example is to help people out is to make their ends our ends. So for example, if you see that someone is poor and hungry, his end at that point might be to get food. If you give him food or money to buy food, you are making it your end to feed him, because his end was to get food. But by buying him food or by giving him money to buy food, you are making his end your end. So since you should treat people as ends, then that means you should sometimes provide people with help. So the problems with the second formulation. So first is the second formulation of categorical imperative is that it's somewhat vague. It doesn't seem that morality is entirely about not treating people as a mere ends to end. So Kant only able to derive obligations to not mistreat physical objects and non-rational living things from obligations to oneself and other rational beings. By misusing objects and animals, we inhabituate ourselves to not giving others the proper respect, which thereby be the basis of our characters. So, but it does seem strange to say that the reason why it's wrong to damage non-human life, it's because it is harmful to oneself.
The third formulation of the categorical imperative. Kant gives a third formulation of the categorical imperative based on the notion of a kingdom of ends. By kingdom, Kant explains, I understand a systematic union of various rational beings through common laws. By a kingdom of ends, we're to imagine an interconnected world of rational beings where everyone is treated as an end and treats everyone else as ends, and everyone shares the same set of law. Kant explains the third formulation as act in accordance with the maxims of a member giving universal laws for a merely possible kingdom of ends. As mentioned, Kant believes that autonomy is necessary for morality. Kant is here emphasizing that we are each the creators of our own moral rules. We are fully autonomous beings, and if our morals were imposed on us, then that would undermine our autonomy. We would no longer fully decide our actions. To maintain full autonomy, everyone must be the creator of their own moral rules. So, everyone is the creators of our own moral rules. However, if everyone is creating their own moral rules, then wouldn't people disagree on what is right and wrong? Kant does not believe so. He believes that the categorical imperative is the only rational moral rule, and he also believes that we can derive a complete, consistent set of moral duties from the categorical imperative. Thus, every person who is fully following their rationality will agree on what is right and wrong. So, if the person was fully following their rationality, it also agree on what is right and wrong. Despite many of the criticisms to which Kant's ethics has been subject, it remains one of the most influential ethical theories in contemporary Western ethics. Many thinkers agree with its emphasis on ethics being fundamentally rational and being justifiable through reason. The first and second formulations of the categorical imperative also do have a great intuitive appeal. Despite the abstract way that the first formulation is expressed, its core meaning is that ethical rules should be universal and that if any rule can't be universalized, it shouldn't be followed. So, in the first formulation, it explained that the rule should be universal, and if the rule is not universalized, it shouldn't be followed. This appeals to our sense that all people deserve equal moral consideration and we shouldn't make special exceptions of ourselves or others. And the second formulation speaks to the idea that we are beings with intrinsic value and with dignity, and to use people as if they are objects or tools is deeply immoral. So, in the second formulation, it speaks to the idea that we are beings with intrinsic value and with dignity. So, if we use other people as if they are objects or as if they are not humans, this is deeply immoral. Kant has put these intuitions into a sophisticated and carefully thought out framework that remains to this day, a very useful way of thinking about difficult moral questions. So these intuitions was put into a sophisticated and carefully thought out framework by Kant. So it remains up to this day, and it is a very useful and helpful way of thinking about difficult moral questions.
A short history of John Rawls. John Rawls was born on February 21, 1921, at Bartholomew, Maryland, USA. He died at November 24, 2002 at Lexington, Massachusetts. John Rawls was an American political and ethical philosopher best known for his defense of egalitarian liberalism in his major work, A Theory of Justice, 1971. He is widely considered the most important political philosopher of the 20th century. After attending an Episcopalian preparatory school, Kent School, in Connecticut, he entered Princeton University, where he earned a bachelor's degree in 1943. He enlisted in the Army and served with the infantry in the South Pacific, then got discharged in 1945. He returned to Princeton in 1946 and earned Ph.D. in moral philosophy in 1950. He taught at Princeton from 1950 to 1952. Next, Cornell University since 1953 to 1959. The Massachusetts Institute of Technology from 1960 to 1962, and finally Harvard University, where he was appointed James Bryant Conant University professor in 1979. Rawls was deeply influenced by the liberal thinkers like John Locke, Jean-Jacques, Immanuel Kant, and Hume, and others. His main theoretical construct is called justice as fairness. This study departs from the perception that there is an explored internal ethical tension within Rawls' justice as fairness. This was argued that Rawls' deontological compasses jeopardize his reconciliation of liberalism and egalitarianism. The objective is accordingly to elucidate the demandingness problem related to deontological ethics and how this affects to Rawls' ideal endeavors. And the so-called demandingness problem was originally conceived in reference to consequentialist ethics.
John Rawls. These principles, chosen by rational individuals in a setting Rawls called original position, in which a veil of ignorance prevails. In this ideal social contract setting, people do not know what their natural assets and abilities are, and the social circumstances in which they are to live. Justice as fairness. Justice within a liberal society. Rawls constructs justice as fairness around specific interpretations of the ideas that citizens are free and equal, and that society should be fair. He sees it as resolving the tension between the ideas of freedom and equality, which have been highlighted both by the socialist critique of liberal democracy and by the conservative critique of modern welfare state. Justice as fairness, the basic structure of society. The basic structure is the location of justice because these institutions distribute the main benefits and burdens of social life, like who will receive social recognition, who will have rich basic rights, who will have opportunities to get what kind of work, what kind of distribution of income and wealth will be, and so on. Two guiding ideas of justice as fairness. Social cooperation in some form is necessary for citizens to be able to lead decent lives. Yet, citizens are not indifferent to how the benefits and burdens of cooperation will be divided among them. Rawls' principles of justice as fairness articulate the central liberal ideas that cooperation should be fair and all citizens regarded as free as equals. The distinctive interpretation that Rawls gives to this concept can be seen as combining a negative and a positive thesis. Two principles of justice as fairness. The first principle of equal basic liberties is to embodied in the political constitution, while the second principle applies primarily to law governing economic institutions. Rawls' second principle of justice has two parts. The first part, fair equality of opportunity, requires that citizens with the same talent and willingness to use them have the same educational and economic opportunities regardless of whether they were born rich or poor. The second part of the second principles is the difference between which regulates the distribution of wealth and income.
To summarize of what is being tackled in the report, so deontology, it focuses on rights, duties, obligations, and rules. So in furthermore, it is specifically on the preservation of individual rights and on the intentions associated with a particular behavior rather than on its consequences. One of the basic ideas in deontological ethics is that some actions are right or wrong in themselves, regardless of their consequences. For example, people have the obligation to tell the truth even if doing so might produce some unfavorable results. In other words, as Kant would have us believe telling the truth is always right in itself, even if again doing so might produce some unfavorable results. Hence, telling a lie, on the contrary, is always wrong for deontological ethics. For example, a physician has just discovered that her patient is having a stage 4 breast cancer. However, the physician cannot divulge the truth to her patient right away because the latter is having a cardiac arrest condition as well. If we are to consider the consequences of the act of telling the truth to the patient, the latter may have sudden cardiac arrest and eventually dies. From the consequentialist point of view, therefore, it is better to tell a lie to the patient and instead divulge the truth to the significant others to avoid sudden death on the part of the patient. But from the point of view of deontological ethics, telling the patient about her real condition is the right thing to do, even if doing so might result in a cardiac arrest. In deontological ethics, therefore, before we make moral decisions, we have to consider first which actions are right and wrong and proceed from there. If an action is right in itself, then we have the duty or the moral obligation to act on it. If an action is wrong in itself, then we are under a moral obligation to act accordingly. So, the benefits of deontology are it places equal importance on every individual, impartial, meaning it safeguards the interests of individual even if they occupy a minority position. It prescribes that certain actions are wrong no matter what the context or consequences. It provides certainty, which is not the case when we determine right and wrong actions on the basis of consequences. And the problems of deontology is it allows for actions that don't maximize happiness.
So, who is John Rawls and what was the name of his book? John Rawls is also a deontologist. A Theory of Justice was the name of his book, which establishes that a system of wealth redistribution ought to be created such it abides by a specific set of moral rules. So, it means that his theory holds every individual has an equal right to basic liberties and they should have the same opportunities and chances as the other people of similar ability. Another way of looking at deontology is that it opposes theological theories such as consequentialism. So consequentialism means that an action's rightness or wrongness depends on the consequences it causes. So, for example, makabuhat ka og sakto, so ang consequence ana is happiness. Then unlike sa nagbuhat ko ka sa dili maayo, ang consequences ana is pain. Now, let's define what deontology is. Deontology defined as an ethical theory that the morality of an action should be based on whether that action itself is right or wrong, under a series of rules, rather than based on the consequences of the action. Their theory believed that killing someone is wrong even if it was a self-defense. Immanuel Kant and John Rawls are similar because John Rawls' theory, which is the theory of justice, is connected on deontological ethics as is it defined as morality of an action. He mentioned that justice as fairness, it is achieved through the notions of the original position and the veil of ignorance. In original position, individuals agree on specific social rules and institutions, while in veil of ignorance, individuals choose the basic structure of society that they thought is just selfish but not rational people who are detached from their concrete identify and context will freely choose to create a society that is truly just. Rawls wants to use the reasoning which all humans to have arrived at the principle of the good.
In addition, Immanuel Kant emphasizes a single principle of duty. He agreed that we have moral duties to oneself and others, such as developing one's talent and keeping our promises to others. For him, we should treat people as an end whenever our actions towards someone reflect the inherent value of that person. And he believed that there was a supreme principle of morality, and he referred to it as the categorical imperative, wherein it is a rule that must be followed regardless of the consequences. And according to his theory, the rightness or wrongness of actions does not depend on their consequences but on whether they fulfill their duty. On the other hand, John Rawls is all about theory of justice, wherein it explores the basic rules that are necessary to ensure fairness in society as a whole. And according to Rawls' theory of justice, in order for a society to be just, everyone must have as much freedom as possible, and everyone should have an equal opportunity to reach desirable positions in the society. And the strength of Kant's system is that it upholds sanctity of human life, meaning the importance of human life, and impartiality, meaning it is the quality that every person is treated equally and no one is given preferential or special treatment. And duty to treat people as an end and never as a means to an end, meaning we should always treat people as people or people with dignity and not as things, and never use them as mere instruments. And the strength of Rawls' system is that it fair way to set up rules and provides important addition to utilitarianism, wherein it provides for the distribution of benefits, since utilitarianism only spoke of maximizing benefits. And lastly, it provides important addition to Kant's theory, wherein it adds to discussion on fairness in distribution, because in Kant's theory only spoke of individual rights but not how to distribute them fairly. And that's it. This is the end of our discussion. Thank you for listening. We hope you understand our topic.